Hey everyone, welcome back to the NES Archive, where we're taking a look at the North American NES library one game at a time. Today's game was originally released for the Nintendo Entertainment System in August of 1986. The game is Urban Champion. Urban Champion is part of the Action series of games. It is basically a fighting game, and it's one of the first fighting games that came out. Actually, I think it's the first fighting game that came out on the Nintendo Entertainment System. The tagline was, "Are you tough enough to take on the baddest guys on the block?" Let's take a look at the back of the box. It says, "Think you're tough, huh? Well, you better be, because you've got to be quick on your feet and fast with your hands to become the next urban champion. You've got to block, fake, and land punches that will knock your opponent off screen. Do that 3 times and there will be a confetti celebration in your honor as you become the new urban champion. But watch out, just when you think you've beat him to the punch, you fall into an open manhole or get hit by a falling flower pot. Think you can handle the action? Then prove it. Play by yourself or challenge a friend. Either way, you'll have a knockout time defeating the toughest guys in the neighborhood in Urban Champion." The developer of the game was Nintendo R&D 1, and the design team, well, there's conflicting information out there. Some sites say that Gunpei Yokoi was the producer on the game. He's responsible for nearly all of Nintendo's early handheld systems. Others say that it was Shigeru Miyamoto who was in charge of that, who everybody knows who he is. There really isn't any way to know for sure, since the records kept on older games, they just weren't the best. The rest of the design team was made up of Makoto Kano, who also worked on games like Super Metroid and Kid Icarus. Sound was by Hirokazu Tanaka, who scored games like Zelda, Mario, and more. The gameplay, well, it's a fighting game. You're fighting random dudes on the street. It's not like the traditional fighting game that people think of where you pick a character and they have a certain move set. Everybody plays exactly the same way, and you are fighting dudes that look exactly like you, except they're color swapped. Let's talk about the move set for a little bit. You have you can punch high or low. You can lean back in order to avoid an oncoming punch. You can choose between weak or strong punches, and the goal is to punch your opponent so that they reel backwards to the next screen. If you push them back far enough, they will fall into a manhole, which was mentioned on the back of the box. But why are all these open manholes everywhere? Must be some kind of problem with the city. If you knock your enemy into the open manhole, some girl will show up in the windows above and start throwing confetti at you. So when you start your fight, there's basically 5 screens, and you start on the middle screen. And if you knock your opponent back, then they will go to the screen to the right. If they knock you back, then you'll go to the screen to the left. On the first screen and the 5th screen, these are the most left and most right screens, there's an open manhole cover. So you're trying to push your opponent back to that. In addition to the fight that I've already talked about, you also have a countdown timer. And as it counts down, if the cops come at the end, then whoever is furthest back will be taken to jail and locked up, and that's the equivalent of losing. So again, you start in the middle, and whoever is closer to the manhole cover, which would cause them to lose if they fell in, then that's the one who would be taken away. Let's talk a little bit about the reception of the game. Generation 4 said that the game was silly and really only good if you're addicted to gaming and have nothing else to play. They gave the game a 25 back in 1987. Power Play magazine gave Urban Champion a 25 as well in 1998. They said, actually, I think that was 89. They said the game was less about skill and more about luck. They called it by far the worst Nintendo game I've seen so far. I have to agree. Maybe not that it's the worst game, but the game is not very fun, and it doesn't feel like skill has any effect on the game whatsoever. It all comes down to luck as to whether you hit the opponent or if the opponent hits you, because you're both trading blows at the same time. And like sometimes you're like, I totally should have gotten that, tagged him that time, and I didn't. Instead, he hit me, and that can be really, really frustrating. That being said, it's not a perfect game. It's It's not even a good game, but what I can say about it is the graphics are really, really good. Especially for the time. I like the massive sprite work that they have. The backgrounds look a little bit boring after a while, but I really like the big sprites of the characters, and it allowed them to show some detail that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. On top of that, I think the animations for the game are actually pretty good as well. One of my favorite parts of the game is when the police show up, not at the end of the game when you've run out of time, but just periodically, the siren will go off, a cop car will drive by, and the two brawlers will retreat to opposite sides of the screen, and they kind of look up at the sky and start whistling as if, no, I haven't done anything wrong. And every time I see that, it makes me chuckle. I think it's a really great addition, and overall, the animation of the game is fantastic. The music is pleasant enough, but it's not good enough that I ever would have guessed that it was by Mr. Tanaka. The game was originally a Game & Watch game, and Urban Champion is basically a port of the Game & Watch games. It was just called Boxing. Now, the review said that it was the worst game ever. I'm sure that there are worse games out there, but I would definitely agree that Urban Champion is not a fun game, and anybody who felt like they got stuck with it would probably have been pretty unhappy. That being said, I had fun learning about this game, and I had fun checking it out for the first time, but I probably will never touch that game again. Anyway, did you ever have any version of this game, be it the Game & Watch or the 3DS remake of it or the original NES game? If so, please let me know what you thought of Urban Champion. Well, that's it for this episode of the NES Archive. I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.